And a very warm welcome. You're joining us at Hyde Park on Ada Derana 24 tonight at Hyde Park. We thought of talking about the ongoing campaign centering Sri Lanka, particularly in terms of extremism and past actions of the L.T.T.E and the civil conflict here in Sri Lanka. To take your memory back to recent incidents, on the 6th of May, Ontario Legislative Assembly in Canada passed Bill 104 alleging and accepting that a genocide took place in Sri Lanka. Then on the 12th of May, we saw the bill receiving royal assent, which brought it into law in Ontario, and on the 13th of May a similar act was presented in the New South Wales Assembly in Australia claiming genocide in Sri Lanka, and on the 18th the US House of Representatives accepted a resolution calling for investigations into alleged genocide and for its perpetrators to be brought to justice. Of course, we saw the Foreign Ministry issuing a statement refuting these claims, and I thought we'll discuss all of this and more here in our studios at Hyde Park tonight. I've invited to join in studio Dr. Prathibha Mahanahewa. Thank you very much, the former Commissioner for the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Thank you for your time. And joining us virtually, we have Dr. Michelle Brooks, Complex Emergencies Specialist. A very warm welcome to you too. Okay, I hope, Dr. Brooks, you hear us? Is the audio clear? Okay, all right. I'm just doing a audio check before we get going with the program. I just gave a breakdown of what's been happening globally. Genocide in Sri Lanka. What's this new campaign that we're seeing? Of course, with the 18th of May, 12 years since the end of conflict here in Sri Lanka, we saw a momentum gathering with the diaspora lobbying for rights of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka. How do you observe this?
Yeah, this campaign started immediately after the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions finished, and again Sri Lanka resolution passed. But there are another two projects you missed. That is where Yasmin Suka is going with the team International Truth and Justice Project. That is where collecting Sri Lanka had committed war crimes. And also you have to remember a month ago US Senator Willie Nickel of US State of North Carolina passed a resolution that is where to set up a Human Rights High Commissioner's office in North and East. Now all these are actually coming before the former Honorable Supreme Court Judge and today a politician, Mr. Vigrara. That is where we started with. He tried to come up with a resolution against Sri Lanka forces had committed genocide, and it was not gone, and it through UK parliamentarian they tried it, but the latest one which is happening in country level. Now don't forget the Bill 104 only in Ontario. This is where they are trying to put into the federal level. If you put into the federal level, it becomes a law, and they are what they are teaching at Bill 104. Just give me 1 minute. They say hero. This is where Brigadier Balraj rather than Karuna was in the top. His skills and those things they are teaching in the schools. Now I can give some example. Peel District School Board, and they issued a statement say Vellimulli Vaikal genocide that is Sri Lanka has committed. What are the source they have? Are these whatever they put these statements, what is the validity? Now what the Canadian High Commissioner had done, they are actually going with this, the leadership in the battlefield. They are all promoting terrorism. And also once again, this United States latest move in the Congress, Tamil homeland. If they are recognizing that in country-wise, finally UN also have no choice. So this is a momentum gathering evidence on one side, and they are covering to the COVID-19, they are trying to spread this. So this is very serious. Sri Lanka government must take this as seriously and take their propaganda in diplomatic level. Otherwise, what will happen? Every country may come up in their legislation a bill passing Sri Lanka forces had committed suicide. No, it was actually a humanitarian protection and also never violated Geneva IV Convention. Please read the book. Thamilini Jayakumaran, former L.T.T.E leader, Tamil, this is L.T.T.E Tamil leader, and later she became a rehabilitation. If you read this book, I ask Canadian to read this book, then we really gather what's happened there.
I'd like to speak more on what the Sri Lankan side must do in countering what's happening globally. But I'd like to turn to Dr. Michelle Brooks. What does all this spell out when we talk about what's going on globally? What does all this spell out for an organization that is proscribed now?
I think that this is a clear indication of the L.T.T.E's global attempt at gaining strength again. And the indications are that in the countries where L.T.T.E fighters and supporters fled to and claimed asylum, those are the countries where we see these laws gathering pace. They are not gathering pace in other countries where L.T.T.E fighters did not flee to. Likewise, in those countries, there's a distinct lack of consistency in gathering evidence to support these claims. This is a David and Goliath battle that we're in, and the Sri Lanka government does need to take it seriously. I believe they do, but I think that the Canadian government in this case is overwhelming a small island nation by passing this legislation and threatening, therefore, to continually, year after year, educate or miseducate Canadians of what really went on during this terrible, terrible war, where people from all sides lost, as is normally the case in a war.
When we say that Sri Lanka needs to take this situation seriously, I think both my guests tonight are talking about what Sri Lanka needs to do. What does it mean? Why haven't we taken it seriously here?
We haven't taken any action. Let's see what happened. This is where Jaffna Municipal Council, V. Manivanan, that is where celebrated all these terrorist activities. And then I'll give examples. Walikamam East Divisional Secretariat. Same thing happened. Even what the Honorable Speaker had done. All these L.T.T.E activities, they were lighting candles inside the parliament. How come that? This is where these TNA leaders are going against the constitution. Were there any patriotic MPs to come up with a resolution against it? I mean this, if a government having a policy, let them ask to celebrate their leaders, those slain leaders, doesn't matter terrorists or not. Otherwise, they say, the government say this is really L.T.T.E terrorists and it is, celebrations are illegal, but still they are celebrating. So what action? Wait, locally, forget about Canada. Now Sri Lanka, I gave several examples where they were celebrating these L.T.T.E terrorist activities and whatever their braveness. Doesn't matter. Any action had taken. This is a real violation. Article 3 of the Constitution. Even Honorable Speaker has made any statement against that. And they were celebrating that inside the Parliament complex in first time, not outside. So this is where you have to take this very seriously. What about the integrity of the country? And also, if you are celebrating that, definitely now these days the forces are, getting information. They are once again promoting L.T.T.E activities. This is where you have to take seriously. If the government having a policy, right, let them give a chance to celebrate. Otherwise, stop them and take them into the court of law. That is the thing government first have to do. Number two, what the government has to do, give the awareness of all the governments, even Commonwealth countries. There is a Commonwealth human rights section in Marlborough House in London. What they can do? All these are representing the country. Ambassadors are there, honorable councillors are there, as well as other organizations are there. Why can't give them a dossier to the government, look here, we have never committed this international humanitarian law and the other things. And even a lot of video films are there. But we are not doing the lobbying. Definitely this has been done by 24 hours, Rudra Kumaran, Nadumaran, Father Emmanuel and Balraj, their sister. They are the people who are doing it. So we are weak in that. The lobby work. Even in Sri Lanka, how many channels we have discussed against this? Nothing. So what the Foreign Ministry, Protocol Division definitely must start a lobby work. That is the first argument I am making.
Dr. Brooks, I'd like to take that question with you too. Do you see that there is little done from the Sri Lankan side here as we talk about a campaign that's needed, that Sri Lanka needing to lobby against what's going on internationally?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the fact that there isn't anything going on to counteract a terrorist narrative within Sri Lanka is evidence in itself that there isn't a brutal regime clamping down on dissent in Sri Lanka right now. And this is precisely why the war went on for 30 years. The important factor to discuss today really is that far, far away in Canada, attempts are being made by L.T.T.E supporters to galvanize support for their narrative on the war. The lack of narrative from people who know what really happened is the reason why their narrative is being heard. I have been in the humanitarian department, in the human rights department in Marlborough House. I have looked at what they have. The file on Sri Lanka is twice the size of any other country in the Commonwealth, which was extraordinary to see. But all the time, the narrative coming to the Commonwealth in Secretariat in Marlborough House is from L.T.T.E supporters and people who support violence as a means to gain, the strategic gains that they wish to get both internationally and in Sri Lanka. What I've noticed in the Canadian bill is that it has been brought by somebody, Vijay Thanigasalam, who himself admitted to being a L.T.T.E supporter previously and has posted very, very disturbing messages on social media platforms about
he had to apologize. I think he was asked to apologize for his statements on Facebook, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct, yes. And he did apologize, but to therefore then come forward and follow that up with a bill to recognize that the terrorist narrative on the war is proof positive that his apology was hollow, and that he did not mean what he said in that apology. It's clear that Vijay Thanigasalam was radicalized in Canada. And now the Canadian government has to answer for these things. Why are people being radicalized in Canada? Why are they promoting a terrorist narrative? This is happening increasingly and has now led to a terrible debacle. It has led to the breakdown of diplomatic relations between Sri Lanka and Canada. We no longer have an ambassador representing the Sri Lankan voice. And this is diabolical for the government in Ottawa to allow that to happen. Now, this activity is typical of a terrorist agenda. The spoiling mechanism, which is well known as a strategy of terrorism, is spoiling diplomatic relations between countries. The intimidation is another recognized strategy of terrorism, which is being pursued in Canada to intimidate by continually repeating the narrative of a terrorist organization. There is no narrative on L.T.T.E transgressions during the war in what is being proposed in Canada. So we can see that it's completely unbalanced. How can this be? How can it be that Canada is sleepwalking into this disaster where they actually promote a narrative coming from terrorist supporters? Have we lost sight of the fact that these are the bad guys? They are in law the bad guys in Canada. It is a proscribed organization. And I am shocked that this man was not arrested and questioned under the Terror Act for promoting terrorism in the way that he did. for him to then be allowed to continue working in a local parliament instead of being suspended is absurd. If this were ISIS we're talking about, it would be immediate. I cannot understand, therefore, why a similarly proscribed organization, the L.T.T.E, does not warrant the same treatment. And this is very concerning. And it has been a long-term issue between Canada and Sri Lanka, where funds and machinery were supplied during the war to the enemy of the Sri Lankan people.
Right. I think I think with that, if you may permit me to take a short commercial break here at Hyde Park, we will return to speak more on this topic. Welcome back. In conversation tonight at Hyde Park, we have with us Professor Prathibha Mahanahewa, former Human Rights Commissioner of Sri Lanka, as well as Dr. Michelle Brooks, Complex Emergencies Specialist. We were talking about what's ongoing internationally and a possible lack of commitment, as my guests tonight say, from the Sri Lankan side to lobby against what's going on. But I heard Dr. Michelle Brooks expressing shock over the governments of Canada or even Western nations not taking action internally about these proscribed organizations and allowing them to rise its head. But how would you look at this, Dr. Mahanahewa? Now, about extremism, and now when we're talking about this this MP who pushed for the bill, he traveled to Canada at a very young age and started talking about all this at the age of 20, possibly, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. But at 20, does this mean he was radicalized there in Canada? And also about diaspora, Sri Lankan diaspora overseas in the US and the UK. Does this mean there is some element of radicalization in the UK or US or in other Western nations?
Yeah. Let me explain. Now, all these coming because L.T.T.E diaspora supporting for a government to be elected. When Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump was there, nothing happened. Because he didn't even believe the Human Rights Council, he thought it is playing a political game. Now when President Joe Biden came, all these L.T.T.E supporters were funding. Lot of evidence there. Not like here. Even you ask from patriotic citizens, those who are Sri Lankans living in Canada, same thing is happening. So therefore they are under obligation. Most of these governments are under obligation because they were the people fully supported for their political wins. So that is one. And also let me explain. How many organizations as there, as you said, in Canada they have Canadian Tamil Youth Alliance, National Council of Canadian Tamil, Tamil Youth Organization, Canadian Tamil Academy, Canadian Tamil Association. Likewise, there are more than 30. All these are actually working and going for an objective to win something that L.T.T.E has lost. So L.T.T.E is a banned and proscribed organization. Even in UK, they are collecting funds. Even this Independence Day and even in May, how many L.T.T.E flags came up in London? What type of action took by the mayor? Nothing. That means they are supporting. Most of this, I'm openly telling, so the government must take immediate action.
But what does this mean diplomatically also? My question again, as a proscribed organization, a terrorist outfit, recognized as a terrorist outfit, what does this mean when we talk about governments allowing it to happen?
Governments allowing it to happen because their lobby work is stronger than Sri Lanka. We are weak in our lobbying. Now, for example, let's see, in USA, they have Foreign Relations Committee. This Foreign Relations Committee is the one who is moving this legislation for traditional Tamil homeland. Now, Washington, D.C., we have an embassy. We have an ambassador. What they have done? So, when they are coming up, or we get the smell of coming this type of a legislation or a bill, we must also act. These patriotic associations are very, very less which supporting for the Sri Lankan government. That is one thing wrong. And also we must have our own human rights action plan. How we are going to promote. Any grievances are there, even missing persons are there, a lot of commissions we have. So all these commissions must work under one umbrella and send one voice to the international scene. Now in October there can be a terrible situation if these things are happening. Why? Lot of other organizations going against Sri Lanka. So one side political movement is there, one side human right violation. Now these type of bills are coming, and also they are recognized in Tamil homeland, and also they say legally now they have recognized genocide. This is only in 2 countries. Next it can go to European Union. If this is happening, finally what will happen? These Sri Lanka war heroes, those who defeated L.T.T.E, must be taken to we are not a party for the Rome Convention, but they are trying to take the evidence through UNHRC. Finally they will go to the Security Council. That is the trend I can see.
Dr. Brooks, do you agree with this? Does this mean this kind of trend could have ripple effects?
Absolutely. I mean, one has to remember that the agenda of any terrorist organization is money. The agenda of an individual creating an act of terror is personal. For the L.T.T.E, it's about money. They need to generate funds. By having an awareness week in Canada, they will be able to raise money, fundraising events, etc. With that money, they will be able to do what they've always done, which is fund chaos in Sri Lanka. By that, they will be able to prove that Sri Lanka is unstable and unsafe for the asylum seekers to return. And this is part of a global plan and operation by the terrorist organization. And countries have to recognize their part in allowing that to continue.
As for a narrative coming out of Sri Lanka or Sri Lanka's counter narrative for these claims coming out of the US or these representations made in Canada, how do you think Sri Lanka needs to work about this?
Sri Lanka needs to, first of all, state that Canada, with its own appalling record of genocide of hundreds of thousands of people over a period of over 100 years, should not be in a position to take a moral high ground over something that happened during a war in Sri Lanka. Canada's removal of native children, the killing of almost 90% of some communities, the withdrawal of nutrition to children during the experiments that were conducted in their assimilation schools, the recent finding last week of a mass grave of over 250 children that were killed in the school. This is all appalling. During this time, the world needs to ask Canada to focus on its own house and get its own house in order, and not be interfering and trying to pass judgment on another country far away. First of all, Canada must look at its own record on genocide. It's absurd for it to be coming forward and looking at some things that happened during a war. If there is a question to answer, it should be answered to a relevant authority such as the UN. It should not be a question that Sri Lanka has to answer to another state who themselves are guilty of tremendous crimes against humanity, whose record on human rights is absolutely appalling, who have stolen the land of people who are native to that country and then built Air Force bases and bombing runs on them. This was reported in 2020, very recently, in the New York Post. And this is very, very remarkably similar to what the Canadians accuse Sri Lanka of. So what we see is from their position of their own shame and guilt, they are coming forward with these judgments on Sri Lanka, and it's wrong, it's fundamentally humanly wrong, and it's not their position to do this. They are sleepwalking into a diplomatic disaster because they are being led forward by somebody who is a supporter of a terrorist organization, who is pursuing a terrorist agenda. And everything that has happened in recent times by that person is textbook terrorism. And we have to look at Canada's Terror Act and revealed that they have not even acted as party to their own terror acts, let alone international law. For Sri Lanka, they must lobby hard that at an international level, both in the Commonwealth and internationally in Geneva, that Canada desist from attacking Sri Lanka in this way and promoting division, because Sri Lanka has moved forward and is a unified nation. Its problems in the past it has put behind it. And whilst questions that remain for families like my own Tamil family who have missing people, they remain, and we become further and further away from truth and answers, the more hostility that is grown in Sri Lanka. We need people to be on side to help us to gain that closure. We don't need people far away creating hostility and funding terrorism, which pushes us ever further away from the truth. And Canada needs to back off from Sri Lanka and focus on its own genocide, stretching back 100 years, and make reparations to its own people who have suffered so much, whose children were removed and never returned, and leave Sri Lanka to move forward with its own truth and reconciliation. And
we can talk about the recommendations. I think we have more time when we come back after this short break to talk about what recommendations our expert panel has for Sri Lanka going forward. Welcome back. Before I go back to Dr. Michelle Brooks, I'd like to turn to Professor Mahanahewa. We are also talking about a recent resolution passed in the UNHRC against Sri Lanka. This follows Sri Lanka co-sponsoring previously and also agreeing to certain recommendations made by this co-sponsored document that Sri Lanka also agreed to. But as we talk about the recent recommendations, what repercussions do we see? Just as much as we talk about the risk that a country faces diplomatically, when we talk about what's ongoing in certain houses in these countries, as well as the resolution passed in the UNHRC, when we combine these two incidents and these events that are ongoing, what do we see?
Before that, I would like to add one thing. Today, Education Week, that is Sri Lanka has committed genocide. Next week, it will come punish those who were involved in genocide. So please remember that. They are coming in a very slow way and they will go to the high. Now I'll come to your one. Now this United Nations Human Rights Council, finally what the argument was, international accountability. That is where they want to put to Sri Lanka. But if you see the United Nations Human Rights Council, all these type of if you are clearly going through the recommendation, I don't want to go one by one, but I like to say one thing. Finally, this is also once again 30/1 recommendation, nothing else than that. So what they do, they want a system to be established which should be monitored by United Nations. So that's why the Council of North Carolina, they came up with the setting up a United Nations office in North and East, but the government must consent for that. Now what is happening here, now they want to show Sri Lanka has committed war crimes, genocide, blah blah, all these things, and collecting all these evidence put into one channel. So that's why different type of projects are working against Sri Lanka. But Sri Lanka is very silent now. That's why the Honorable President has appointed a commission to look what type of United Nations Human Rights Councils can be adopted in Sri Lanka. That is a very good thing. Why I am saying that? Because you can see and really analyze the commission headed by Supreme Court Judge, Honorable Justice Nawaz. Now they look very clearly and they can see and recommend the government. As you asked, what are the recommendations? So before October session, Sri Lanka can come up with its own system. That is where countries are independent in United Nations Human Rights Council, and there are a lot of other countries which are supporting for us. So my argument, we will set up our own system, we will lobby it, and also you have to see one thing, once again after 12 or 13 years what occurred, it is coming up. So that's why these combined resolution and other thing, today there is no combined resolution. So finally I want to say one thing, the recommendations which locally, which we are going to adopt sooner than better, is the best thing.
Dr. Brooks, you were talking about the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission and what Sri Lanka can do internally. But let me also add to you, Sri Lanka can't be isolated here also when we deal with the UNHRC and with the international community, especially when a resolution has been passed against Sri Lanka. At the same time, you're talking about what's happening internationally in certain Western countries, that it was not shut within the country itself without allowing it to bloom. How can we move forward as a nation here? Because these resolutions, now I'm reading out the US Congress resolution, which urges the international community to advocate for and protect the political rights and representation of the Tamil people in Sri Lanka and work towards a permanent political solution, and recommends the United States to explore investigations and prosecutions pursuant to the recommendations of the UNHRC. Now everything is interlinked here. So how can we have a concerted and coherent effort here?
First of all, the permanent solution towards unification is already happening in Sri Lanka. And I think that countries like Canada, the UK, the USA need to really get on that page and understand that things have moved on here in Sri Lanka. The divisive language about Tamil homeland and that, it's all really very much in the past. Today, the people have moved on and they are hoping to find their missing people. They are hoping to get answers to what happened. Of course they are. Similarly to the Canadian people, victims of the Canadian genocide, are searching for answers about where their children were buried, etc. And these things happen. And people need to go back and find out the truth and get closure for their families. And that's ongoing. And that's business for Sri Lanka, and only can be conducted in Sri Lanka by Sri Lankans. The idea of regime change, I think, is very much there between the lines of the documents of the US Congress. It is there between the lines in the Canadian genocide bill. And I think that that is clear evidence of a terrorist agenda. They are once again attacking their old enemy, which is the current government of Sri Lanka. And so the Canadians have to look to what's going on here and realize that they are following behind a terrorist agenda. And what we need to see from Sri Lanka is a listing down of all of the things that occurred during the war. Yesterday was the anniversary of the killing of 33 monks, some of whom were children, by the L.T.T.E. These things are never mentioned. These things are not there in the education and the awareness week that is being proposed in Canada. And they need to be for people to get closure in Sri Lanka about what happened, not just to one side, but all sides. We need to look back at the war and feel like we have all together come to a conclusion about what happened and learned lessons from that. At the moment, what's happening is it's a very one-sided view, which is the side of the terrorist organization that perpetuated and kept a war going for 30 years in Sri Lanka. I think that with the UNHRC, Sri Lanka has to make all of these narratives available. There is no other narrative except that of the terrorist organization right now. And that's happening in London every single day outside Parliament. And I've been there many times myself and walked past it. For families that are Tamil, like my own, in Ontario, in Australia, and in London, it's frightening to see the Tamil Tiger flags flying in London, where they're fighting with police officers in a residential street. It's scary, thinking that we had put it all behind us, and to see yet again the ugly face of terrorism raise its head in London, in Canada, in Washington, And these countries need to answer to these things. They need to answer to why they're allowing that to happen and whether or not they have another agenda themselves for political change in Sri Lanka. This is a democratic country, and it is not for other countries to interfere in its democratic process.
Professor Mahanahewa, I remember speaking to you at Hyde Park at the same studio here right after the Easter attacks. We were reviewing the incidents and what we need to do within Sri Lanka in order to prevent and in order to ensure that the loopholes existing in the law does not provide the setting for another incident as such. But we're talking about extremism here, radicalization, and we're also talking about laws, hate speech. Have we moved ahead since then? Have we made any effort in ensuring ensuring the prevention of what may happen in the future?
That's a very good question, because hate speech and certain type of other religious intoxications are there. So actually, if police is doing their duty and if they are going with the investigation with the penal code, still there are enough provisions to take action. So what we have to see, the criminal justice and transnational justice, all these things taken into account, the new constitution. That is one step we can go. Now we know the government gave a promise. They are coming with a brand new constitution. With that constitution, right to life, and if you have a separate chapter like South Africa 1996 constitution, that is number one. So number two, you have to review all these laws. But what's happening in social media, I have no time to explain. But definitely hate speech, and you know, if clashes in religious statements, if they are putting in the Facebook, definitely they go for a ban. But what we have to act in a very responsible nation, and the government must be alert, not only COVID-19, see human rights against Sri Lanka, what type of lobby work actually happening. So we must review these things. That's why Sri Lanka Law Commission is there, and take people's views and come up with a law that protect people's right, as well as in a democratic way what we can do this lobby work and market our human right action plan in the Western countries. Then only we can win the confidence. This is once again a political game. Whatever you say in United Nations Human Rights Council, once again Cuba, China, Vietnam, Russia, they are in one side, and the other set is other side. So therefore, even we have a wonderful or 100% perfect human right action plan, whatever the resolution coming one side, they go with the other side. So this is a political game finally. That's only I can tell. So we have to promote our thing, and the ambassadors, you must do a lot of work to protect human right protection in Sri Lanka, and whatever the government initiatives you have to take, and you have to have the awareness program. I'll tell one thing. Now, in 17 countries in the Caribbean region, only one embassy is there. That is the Cuban embassy. So therefore, you have to see how you can promote and get the vote in that region is very, very less. So you have to get all the patriotic citizens in that area and come up with certain lobby programs. Those are my recommendations.
Dr. Brooks, I'd like to go back to a question I asked Dr. Mahanahewa about extremism and how young people are radicalized in Western nations. We're also talking about the diaspora in the Sri Lankan diaspora overseas in Western countries. You've done extensive research on migration, human behavior, terrorists and radicalization. What sort of observation do you have to share about this ongoing campaign, and over a period of over 25 years now, and the build up there and the campaign that's ongoing?
First of all, we have to understand that a certain part of society is very vulnerable to radicalization. In particular, young people are very vulnerable. In Canada, for example, people like this BJ Thanikasalam, is young and has been radicalized there to pursue a terrorist agenda. For Sri Lanka, likewise, the Easter bombings came where people were radicalized in Sri Lanka to pursue a terrorist agenda. The disaffection and the disenfranchisement of these people through prejudice, through racism, through hate speech is clear, it's in evidence. And what's really important is that Sri Lanka pursues a widespread mainstreaming of counter-extremism education for all children to, first of all, not be radicalized themselves, but also for teachers to be able to spot vulnerable children, changes in children, children who are being influenced from outside their families, and children whose language has changed recently, this kind of thing. I think that we have to look at extremism within the country as something we can deal with, and something that we can really, really get a grip on and take control of through education, through government-sponsored awareness models where we've seen children being shown how other children have been radicalized so that they can spot the signs of that, where they're being groomed online. Mostly extremism is groomed online. Children are picked up on the web, and they are spoken to by people who are terrorists who pretend that they're actually other children, and they slowly groom the kids to, I mean, in the case of the UK, very, very good children from good families who were doing very well at school were radicalized to pack their bags and leave the country secretly to go to Syria.
Right.
And there was a massive exodus of children. There was a huge work to be done, and that I was also part of, to stop this from happening. And it worked through schools. And that's what we have to learn from, to prevent our children from being dragged down this path again. And to be aware that the L.T.T.E. and Islamist terrorists are out there trying to affect our children, trying to reach into our very families through the internet. We need to be watchful and mindful as parents, watching what our children are interacting with on computers and being responsible about it. We have to play our part.
Right.
For the UK, it was a real man in the mirror moment where we had to actually say, what have we done wrong to allow this to happen? But we can't affect what happens in
about
Canada
2
very
minutes.
easily
We have about 2
government.
minutes to go on the show. You have about 10 to 20 seconds, Dr. Brooks, for your final remarks.
I think that Canada needs to be told to back off from Sri Lanka and allow Sri Lanka to go forward in unity itself and extend the hand of friendship, rather than create divisive policies that will lead to hostility in Sri Lanka for the Tamil population.
Thank you there. And Dr. Mahanahewa, final remarks here. We have about roughly 1.5 to 2 minutes. We were talking about what Sri Lanka can do, what we need to do within schools, but during a difficult time as this, COVID-19, children are at home, parents are at home, they're glued to the internet. That's all we have to do. Also countering extremism. It's not easy. We're talking about mental health on the other side and the legal side here. What are your final remarks? And
also a lot of cases coming under quarantine, quarantine ordinance also. Yeah, what we can do, we'll get ready for the October sessions now. To get ready for the October session, 2 words only. We will have a National Human Rights Action Plan, and whatever earlier in the Darusman report and all which came up in and denied in the LLRC. So LLRC having a good methodology how Sri Lanka should go with the reconciliation and rehabilitation. So my only final word, Paranagama Commission also having all these type of recommendation, get all these recommendations and prepare a set of National Human Rights Action Plan and kindly appoint a committee in the Parliament to study this and propose, and finally we will present this in the October sessions. And also a draft of the Constitution is much needed if you are going to promote this. Thank you very much.
Dr. Prathibha Mahanahewa, Professor of Law and the former Human Rights Commissioner of Sri Lanka, joining us at Hyde Park tonight, and also Dr. Michelle Brooks, Complex Emergencies Specialist, military instructor, UK Police Counter-Terrorism Command and Airports Counter-Terrorism Trainer. Thank you for your time here at Hyde Park. And to all of you, thank you for joining us tonight.